I want to tell you something that took me years to understand. When you move into a house that is not yours, you do not just move your body. You move your silence, you move your habits, you move the way you stand when someone walks into a room, the way you hold your fork, the way you breathe when you are not sure if you are allowed to breathe freely. I was 22 years old when I carried my one-packed trunk into Jonas and Ruth's farmhouse on a Tuesday morning in October, and I did not know that by Friday I would already be a different person. Not changed in the way people talk about when they say a trip changed them or a book changed them. Changed the way a bone changes when it breaks and the body quietly, without permission, begins deciding how it will heal. Before we go any further, I want to say something directly to you. More than 90% of the people watching right now have not subscribed yet. And I think about that because these are not just stories. These are the things that were never supposed to be said out loud. If you have ever sat in a house that did not feel like yours and smiled anyway, if you have ever made yourself small so the room around you felt bigger, then you already know what I am about to tell you. Please subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to the telling of these stories. And while you are here, I want to ask you something in the comments. What is the one thing you changed about yourself to fit into a place that was never built for you? I want to know. Now let me tell you about that first week. The house smelled like wood smoke and lye soap and something underneath that I could not name for days. Later, I understood it was the smell of a family that had lived in the same rooms for 3 generations. A smell that does not come from cleaning. A smell that comes from time. From hundreds of mornings of the same breakfast at the same table. From years of the same prayers said in the same low voices before the same meals. It was a living smell, warm and dense, and I was new inside it in a way that everyone in that house could feel, even if no one said so. Eli and I had been married for 7 months by the time we moved in. His father, Jonas, had taken sick the previous spring, not badly enough to stop working, but badly enough that his oldest son was needed closer. That was how it was decided. Not a question put to me, not a conversation I was invited to. A letter arrived, Eli read it, Eli spoke with his parents, and the next time I sat across from him at supper, he told me quietly that we would be moving to his family's farm by October. He said it the way you tell someone the weather has turned, as though I would simply adjust. And I did. That was what I had been taught. You adjust. You fold yourself into the shape of what is needed, and you do not make noise about the folding. But here is the thing I need you to stay with me for. The thing that did not become clear until that very first week. Moving into Eli's family home was not like moving into a house. It was like moving into a language I had never been taught, but was expected to speak perfectly from the first morning. Every family has a language like that. Not just the words, the rhythms, the rules that are never written anywhere, because everyone who belongs already knows them without being told. Ruth, my mother-in-law, was not a cruel woman. I want to say that clearly because what I am about to tell you could make her sound like one, and she was not. She was precise, she was certain. She had run that farmhouse for 31 years, and she had a way of doing every single thing that was, in her mind, not just her way, but the correct way. The way God intended a household to run, the way her own mother had taught her, the way things had always been done, and therefore the way things must continue. I learned this on the very first morning. I came downstairs before sunrise the way I always did. I had been waking early since girlhood. There is something about the hour before the house wakes that has always belonged to me, quietly, in a way I could not explain. I came down to start the fire in the stove, which is what I had done every morning since I was 12. I thought I was being helpful. I thought I was showing Ruth that I was not a burden, that I knew how to carry my weight in a working household. What I did not know was that starting the fire was Ruth's task. It had been Ruth's task every morning for 31 years. It was the first thing she did when she woke. It was how her day began. It was, though she never said this in so many words, hers. She came downstairs and found me crouching at the stove with the flint in my hand, and she stopped in the doorway, and something moved across her face so quickly I almost missed it. It was not anger exactly. It was something more unsettling than anger. It was the look of a woman who has just discovered that someone has rearranged the furniture in her mind. She said nothing. She walked to the stove, took the flint gently from my hand, and started the fire herself. And then she turned and looked at me with a face that was perfectly composed, and she said, "Good morning, Hannah. Did you sleep well?" And I said, "Yes, thank you." And that was all. But something had shifted, and we both felt it. I had touched something I was not supposed to touch on the very first morning, and now I did not know what else in that house I was not supposed to touch. And there was no list, and there was no map, and no one was going to give me one. That was the first thing the first week taught me. There are rules you cannot learn by asking. You can only learn them by breaking them and watching what happens in someone's eyes. The second thing I learned came on Wednesday. I had been watching Ruth carefully by then, trying to map the invisible lines of that household. Who set the table, whose bread recipe was used and whose was not, where the jars were placed after canning, whose opinion was asked about the garden and whose was not. It was a careful and exhausting kind of watching, the kind you do when you are living somewhere that has not yet decided whether it will accept you. Eli's younger sister Martha was 17 and still living at home. She was quick and a little sly, and she watched me the way younger sisters often watch women who have married their brothers, measuring me for something, though I was not sure what. On Wednesday afternoon, Martha found me in the pantry, and she stood in the doorway for a moment, and then she said, very quietly, "She sets the bread on the left side of the shelf, not the right. You put it on the right this morning." I looked at her. I said, "Thank you for telling me." She nodded. She started to turn. Then she stopped and said, "She is not trying to be difficult. She just does not know how to share this house yet. She has never had to." And then Martha walked away and left me standing in the pantry with those words settling over me like a quilt. I stayed in the pantry for a long time after that. The jars of canned tomatoes lined up in their rows, the dried bundles of herbs hanging from the low beam, the smell of root vegetables and old wood, and something faintly sweet I still could not name. I stood there and I let Martha's words do their slow work on me, the way cold water does its work when you finally stop moving against it. She has never had to share this house yet. This is the part I want you to hear, because this is what I did not expect. I had walked into that farmhouse braced to be disliked. I had prepared for coldness and judgment, and the particular kind of silence that can mean 100 different kinds of rejection. What I had not prepared for was the possibility that Ruth was also afraid. That Ruth, who had built every single thing in that house with her own hands and her own years, was also standing at a distance, also waiting, also trying to figure out how to hold what was hers while making room for someone new. I had not prepared for the possibility that we were both lost in the same house and too proud and too uncertain to say so. That realization, standing in that pantry on a Wednesday afternoon with the smell of dried herbs and stored apples all around me, was the thing that changed me. Not softened me. I want to be careful about that word. I had been softened enough in my life, softened until I had lost the shape of my own edges. What I mean is that I saw something true that I had not been able to see before. That the women around me, the ones who seemed certain and settled and unmovable in their ways, were often holding things together with both hands and hoping no one could see the effort. Ruth came to find me that evening. I was sitting on the porch steps in the last light, not thinking about anything in particular, or pretending not to. She sat down beside me without saying anything for a while. The farm settled into the dark around us. The cows moved in the far field. A lantern was lit in the barn. Then Ruth said, "I have been thinking about the fire." I said, "I am sorry, I did not know." She said, "No, I have been thinking that it was a good thing, that you rose early. I was just not ready." That was all she said. She sat for a few more minutes and then she went inside. But I understood what that cost her. I understood because I had grown up in a world where the women did not apologize and did not explain and did not admit to being not ready. What Ruth had just done in those 10 quiet words on the porch steps was extend something toward me that in her world was almost never extended. She had let me see the seam. By Friday, I was different. Not because the house had become mine. It had not and would not for a long time. But because I understood something that my 17-year-old self, standing in my wedding dress, had not known. A house is not a building you move into. A house is an agreement you slowly, carefully, imperfectly begin to build with the people already inside it. It is not theirs and it is not yours. It is the thing that grows in the space between. There were hard weeks ahead. There were mornings Ruth and I moved around each other like water around stone, each of us certain the other was the stone. There were evenings I went to the room Eli and I shared and sat on the edge of the bed with the feeling that I was too big for that house and too small for it at the same time. that I did not belong anywhere inside it, and I would never stop being new. There were arguments that never became arguments because in that world, arguments did not happen. They became silence, which is a much harder thing to survive. But there was also the morning Ruth taught me how she made her pie crust, not because I asked, but because she chose to. There was the afternoon she asked my opinion about whether the kitchen garden should be moved before winter, and then actually moved it the way I suggested. There was the evening she called me into the sitting room to show me a quilt she was beginning and asked which color I thought should go in the border. And when I told her, she nodded in a way that said she had already been thinking the same. Small things. Stitches in something larger that we were making without naming it. I left the community the following year, but that is another story, and I have told parts of it in other videos. What I want to stay with here, in this telling, is that first week, because the first week is the one I have thought about the most. Not because it was the hardest, it was not, but because it was the one that asked me a question I was not ready for. It asked me, what are you willing to see in a person who has made your life smaller? Are you willing to see that she is also afraid? Are you willing to see that the walls she has built were not built against you, that they were built long before you arrived, and that you walked into a structure that had nothing to do with you and everything to do with her survival? Are you willing to look at the woman who took the flint from your hand and see not an enemy, but a person holding something so tightly her knuckles have gone white? I was not sure at 22. I am more sure now. The life that closed around me in that house was not the life I would have chosen. But the women inside it were real. Ruth was real. Martha was real. The fear underneath the certainty was real. And when I finally left, I carried something with me that I had not expected to carry. Not bitterness, not relief, not only relief. I carried the memory of a woman sitting down beside me on a porch step in the dark and saying 10 words that her whole world had told her she did not need to say. I was just not ready. I think about that sometimes. The courage it takes to say that. In any world, in any language. I was not ready. Not as an excuse, not as a defense, just as a truth, set down carefully in the last of the evening light. If you have ever moved into a life that was not built for you, if you have ever stood in someone else's kitchen trying to learn the rules from their eyes, if you have ever been new somewhere and felt the weight of everything you did not know yet, I see you. You were not wrong for struggling. You were not weak for taking time. The houses we find ourselves in are never just houses. They are histories. They are grief. They are love that hardened into habit over years. Walking into one and trying to find your place inside it is one of the most quietly difficult things a person can do. You were doing something harder than anyone around you probably knew. And the fact that you kept going, that you got up the next morning and tried again to learn the language of that place, that you kept watching for the rules and kept making mistakes and kept waking before sunrise, even when no one thanked you for it. That is not a small thing. That is a kind of courage that does not get named because it does not look like courage from the outside. From the outside, it just looks like a woman standing in a pantry, moving a loaf of bread from the right side of a shelf to the left. Before you go, I want to thank you for staying with me through every word of this. I know there are 1,000 places you could spend this time, and you spent it here. But I have to tell you something I noticed. More than 90% of the people who watch these videos have still not subscribed. And if this story stayed with you, if something in it reminded you of a house you once stood in, or a woman you once watched holding something too tightly, or a version of yourself that was trying so hard to learn the language of a place that did not yet know your name, then I hope you will subscribe and stay. It is free. It keeps these stories alive. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you wish someone had said to you in your first week somewhere new? Tell me. I will read every word. Until next time, remember this. The house that was not built for you is not proof that you do not belong anywhere. It is just proof that your house has not found you yet.